The year is 1348. Avignon, the city of popes, pulsed with a false sense of security. Within the imposing walls of the papal palace, power and piety intertwined, while outside, the shadows lengthened, portending a darkness unlike any seen before. Unbeknownst to most, in a hidden corner of the city, Brother Thomas sought a light to pierce that encroaching gloom. His alchemical pursuits, a dangerous dance between faith and forbidden knowledge, consumed him. He sought not gold, but a panacea, a universal cure to alleviate the suffering he witnessed daily. He believed that within the secrets of creation lay the key to undoing the ravages of disease. Lady Isabella arrived in Avignon, summoned by family matters. Though of noble blood, she possessed a keen intellect and a thirst for knowledge that extended beyond the confines of courtly life. The whispers of intellectual ferment in Avignon intrigued her, drawing her into its orbit. She navigates the gilded halls of her uncle's residence, a world of power and influence. Yet her mind is elsewhere, drawn to the whispers of natural philosophy and the hidden currents of scientific inquiry. Meanwhile, Jean de Venette, a Carmelite friar and chronicler, diligently recorded the unfolding events. He noted the unusually warm weather, the erratic behavior of animals, and the growing unease among the populace, subtle signs, perhaps, of a greater calamity to come. He sensed a disquiet in the air, a palpable tension that belied the city's outward appearance of prosperity. He felt compelled to document everything, to leave a record for posterity, should the worst come to pass. Back in his chamber, Thomas immersed himself deeper into his research. He pored over ancient texts, deciphering alchemical secrets passed down through generations, seeking any clue that might lead him to his elusive panacea. Master Elias, the apothecary, supplied Thomas with the rare and potent ingredients he required. He admired the friar's dedication, but also harbored deep reservations about the path he was treading. He knew that some doors were best left unopened. Intrigued by whispers of clandestine experiments, Isabella subtly began her own inquiries. She sought knowledge from scholars and discreetly gathered information about a certain Dominican friar who dabbled in forbidden arts. Thomas felt he was on the verge of a breakthrough. One particular concoction shimmered with an otherworldly light, holding promise of extraordinary power. But with each step forward, a nagging doubt crept into his mind. Was he truly serving God, or was he succumbing to the siren call of forbidden knowledge? Jean de Venette's premonitions began to materialize. The first cases of the pestilence were reported, whispers turning into screams as the Black Death tightened its grip on Avignon. The shadows had arrived, and they brought with them unimaginable suffering. As the plague spread like wildfire, Thomas, witnessing the mounting death toll, couldn't shake off a growing sense of unease. Was his quest for a cure somehow contributing to the catastrophe? Had his alchemical folly unleashed something far more terrible than he could have ever imagined? A terrifying thought began to form in his mind. Knowledge, untempered by wisdom, could be a dangerous poison. The urgency in Thomas's heart quickened his pace. He needed Elias' wisdom, and quickly. The alchemical process demanded precise ingredients, and time was a luxury Avignon could no longer afford. Elias' shop, usually bustling, was eerily quiet. The scent of herbs, normally comforting, felt heavy, laced with a hint of foreboding. Master Elias, I require mandragora root, aged 3 years and purified antimony. My work progresses, but I am in dire need, Thomas said, his voice strained. Elias retrieved the requested items. These are potent, Brother Thomas. What endeavor requires such aggressive components? Thomas confided in him. A universal panacea, Master Elias, a cure for all ailments, especially this plague. I believe alchemy holds the key. In the city square, Isabella observed a heated debate. Scholars clashed over Aristotelian physics versus emerging theories of natural philosophy. Isabella, emboldened, challenged the prevailing view. If humors cause disease, as you claim, why do some succumb while others remain untouched? Where is the accounting for the influence of corrupted air? Jean de Venette meticulously recorded the scene. The clash between old and new ideas was intensifying, mirroring the city's growing desperation. Whispers of strange new illnesses spread. Not merely the buboes of the plague, but something different. A fever that burned from within, leaving the skin unmarked. Elias saw the new sickness firsthand. Its swiftness and unusual symptoms baffled him. He had heard tales of such ailments in the East, but never imagined they would reach Avignon. Driven by Elias' account and his own mounting anxiety, Thomas plunged deeper into his research, neglecting his health and his prayers. Jean de Venette wrote, "A darkness falls upon Avignon, unseen but felt by all. The old sickness is joined by a new terror, and the cries of the dying echo in the streets." The first whispers of pestilence arrived not on the wind, but on the tongues of merchants returning from Italy. Tales of swollen buboes, fevered delirium, and swift death painted a grim portrait that even the papal palace could not ignore. Thomas, however, saw opportunity in the face of despair, a chance to prove the efficacy of his alchemical panacea. Jean de Venette witnessed the unraveling. Each day more flee Avignon, seeking refuge in the countryside, unaware that death travels with them. The city walls meant to protect now feel like a cage. Isabella watched as the city began to succumb. Even the roses in her garden, usually so vibrant, seemed to mirror the pallor of the afflicted. She wondered if Thomas's remedies could truly hold back the tide. Elias saw the sickness spreading like wildfire. His remedies, once trusted, now seemed futile against this unseen enemy. Fear had become his constant companion. The signs are unmistakable. A sudden fever chills, and then the telltale buboes, grotesque swellings that signal impending death. The speed with which it claims its victims is terrifying. Thomas isolated the humors within the blood of the infected. He became convinced that within the putrid fluid lay the key to both the plague's virulence and its cure. He felt as though he was on the verge of a great discovery. Isabella, defying the growing panic, visited Thomas's laboratory. She had heard of his work and, despite the risks, felt compelled to witness his efforts firsthand. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and even she recoiled slightly. "You are meddling with forces beyond your understanding, Thomas," Elias warned. "This is not a simple ailment but a divine scourge. Leave it be before you unleash something far worse." The death carts rumble through the streets day and night, their drivers calling out for the dead. The cemeteries overflow, and mass graves are dug to accommodate the relentless tide. Hope dwindles with each passing sun. Driven by a desperate need to validate his work, Thomas began to administer his experimental concoctions to the afflicted. He observed each patient with agonizing intensity, searching for any sign of improvement. Isabella sought solace in prayer, torn between her faith and her scientific curiosity. She prayed for the souls of the afflicted and for Thomas's safety, hoping that his work would bring salvation, not further devastation. The city emptied, its spirit broken. Even Elias, with his vast knowledge of herbs and remedies, felt powerless against the pestilence. He could only watch as Avignon succumbed to the whispers of pestilence. The weight of Avignon pressed upon Thomas. Each toll of the church bell announced another soul claimed by the pestilence. Sleep offered little respite, only visions of swollen limbs and fevered eyes. He clung to his work, these ancient texts his only shield against despair. Isabella's visits became more frequent. Her presence, a beacon in the encroaching darkness, brought not only intellectual stimulation but also a sense of purpose. She saw in Thomas's pursuit a glimmer of hope, a defiance against the relentless march of death. Isabella, leveraging her familial influence, began to subtly advocate for Thomas. She spoke of his dedication, his brilliance, and the potential benefits of his research. Her words, though carefully chosen, carried the weight of her lineage. The library, a repository of forbidden knowledge, yielded its secrets. Thanks to Isabella's intervention, Thomas gained access to texts previously beyond his reach. Ancient treatises on humors, distillations, and the properties of rare minerals lay open before him. The city's cries grew louder each day. Jean de Venette, ever the diligent chronicler, documented the rising tide of despair. The numbers were staggering, each entry a testament to the plague's insatiable hunger. Elias, burdened by the suffering he witnessed daily, worked tirelessly. His apothecary became a sanctuary, a place where the afflicted sought solace and remedies, however fleeting. The demand far exceeded his dwindling supplies. Driven by desperation, Thomas ventured into uncharted territories. The study of anatomy, long considered taboo, became his obsession. He sought to unravel the plague's secrets by dissecting the bodies of its victims, seeking the locus of the disease. Such practices went against the teachings of the Church. The corpses were acquired in the dead of night. Unable to procure human cadavers easily, Thomas turned to animals. Mice, rats, and stray dogs became subjects of his increasingly desperate experiments. He meticulously cataloged his findings, searching for patterns, for clues, for anything that might lead him to a cure. "You tread a dangerous path, Thomas," Elias warned, his voice heavy with concern. "These experiments, they border on the profane. Are you sure you are not inviting a greater evil?" Isabella, witnessing Thomas's descent into darker practices, felt a growing unease. Her scientific curiosity warred with her deeply held religious beliefs. Was this pursuit of knowledge worth the cost? Was Thomas becoming consumed by his ambition? Jean de Venette, grappling with the ethical complexities of his task, wrestled with the question of posterity. Would future generations judge their actions harshly? Was he, in recording these events, inadvertently condemning them? In his isolated chamber, Thomas stood at a precipice. He held in his hand the culmination of his efforts, a substance born of forbidden knowledge and desperate measures. He was closer than ever to a breakthrough, but the shadows of doubt and fear loomed large. The line between savior and destroyer had become dangerously blurred. Thomas toiled relentlessly, driven by a desperate hope. The whispers of the dying haunted his dreams, and each failed experiment chipped away at his resolve. He reasoned that divine intervention alone was insufficient. God granted humans the intelligence to unravel nature's secrets and provide a solution to the plague. The long hours spent in the laboratory distanced Thomas from his brothers. He missed the communal prayers, the shared meals, the simple camaraderie. He struggled to reconcile his alchemical pursuits with his religious vows, justifying his actions as a service to God and humanity. Isabella, though fascinated by Thomas's work, worried about his growing isolation. She saw the toll the relentless experiments took on his body and spirit. She wanted to help, but feared that interfering would only drive him further into his obsessive quest. "You seek to play God, Thomas," Elias cautioned, his voice raspy with age. "Knowledge is a double-edged sword. Used wisely, it can heal. Wielded recklessly, it can destroy. Be wary of your ambition, for it can blind you to the consequences of your actions." "I do not seek to usurp God's power," Thomas retorted, his voice tight with frustration. "I only seek to understand his creation, to alleviate the suffering that plagues this city. Is that not a worthy endeavor?" Jean de Venette, ever the chronicler, documented Thomas's activities with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. He noted the friar's increasingly erratic behavior, his neglect of his religious duties, and the growing unease among the other members of the Dominican order. Whispers of heresy began to circulate within the Dominican monastery. Some brothers questioned the orthodoxy of Thomas's alchemical pursuits, suspecting him of dabbling in forbidden arts. They feared that his actions might bring divine retribution upon the entire community. The abbot, accompanied by two stern-faced friars, demanded entry to Thomas's laboratory. The time for secrecy was over. Thomas's alchemical experiments had attracted the unwelcome attention of the church. "Brother Thomas," the abbot declared, his voice heavy with disappointment, "we have received reports of your unorthodox activities. Explain yourself. Are you engaged in practices that defy the teachings of the church?" Isabella, hearing of Thomas's predicament, rushed to the monastery to intercede on his behalf. She argued that his alchemical pursuits were driven by a desire to help the afflicted, not by heretical intentions. But her words fell on deaf ears. Elias watched from afar, knowing that Thomas's ambition had led him down a dangerous path. He feared that the friar's relentless pursuit of knowledge would ultimately lead to his downfall. Thomas stood his ground, refusing to renounce his alchemical work. He believed that the potential benefits outweighed the risks, that the pursuit of knowledge was a sacred duty. But as he looked into the eyes of his accusers, he saw not understanding but fear. The stench of death permeated Avignon, a constant reminder of the plague's relentless march. Brother Thomas, fueled by desperation, pushed onward, his alchemical sanctum now a chaotic reflection of the city's suffering. Failed concoctions littered the table, each a testament to the disease's stubborn resistance. From her vantage point, Isabella witnessed the collapse of order. The streets, once bustling with life, were now pathways of despair. The church's pronouncements of divine retribution offered little comfort, and Isabella felt a growing unease with their inaction. Jean de Venette, with a heavy heart, documented the horrors that unfolded around him. Each entry in his chronicle was a testament to the city's suffering, a record for a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. He wrote of the abandoned, the forgotten, and the countless nameless victims of the pestilence. Elias, his apothecary ravaged by the plague, struggled to provide solace. His shelves, once overflowing with remedies, were now bare, a stark reminder of the pestilence's insatiable hunger. He offered what little he could, knowing it was a mere drop in the ocean of suffering. Driven by a desperate hope, Thomas moved his experiments from the laboratory to the bedsides of the afflicted. He knew the risks, the ethical boundaries he was crossing, but the cries of the dying drowned out his conscience. He was no longer a scholar, but a desperate physician grasping at straws. Isabella, emboldened by her growing doubts, confronted the church's leadership. She questioned their lavish lifestyle in the face of such widespread suffering, their reliance on prayer over practical solutions. Her words, though carefully chosen, were a challenge to the established order. Jean witnessed the disintegration of Avignon's social fabric. Desperation fueled anarchy, and the streets became a battleground for survival. The once orderly city had descended into chaos, a testament to the plague's destructive power. Elias, horrified by the rumors of Thomas's experiments on the sick, sought him out. He pleaded with the friar to abandon his reckless pursuit, warning him of the potential consequences of tampering with forces beyond his comprehension. "Some doors are best left unopened, Thomas," he cautioned. Despite Elias' warning, Thomas pressed on, driven by a flicker of hope. He believed he was on the verge of a breakthrough, a concoction that could finally halt the plague's advance. His obsession blinded him to the potential dangers. Isabella, drawn by both her scientific curiosity and her concern for Thomas, secretly observed his experiments. She witnessed the suffering of the patients, the desperate hope in their eyes, and the uncertainty of Thomas's methods. She realized the immense risk involved, not only for the patients but also for Thomas himself. Jean, acting as an objective observer, meticulously recorded the results of Thomas's experiments. He noted the fleeting moments of improvement, the devastating setbacks, and the overall lack of consistent success. The weight of his responsibility as a chronicler grew heavier with each passing day. Exhausted and disillusioned, Thomas collapsed. The shattered vial symbolized the failure of his efforts, the futility of his quest. He was faced with a chilling realization. His pursuit of knowledge might have inadvertently worsened the very crisis he sought to alleviate. Thomas, fueled by sleep deprivation and a desperate hope, believed he was on the verge of a breakthrough. He muttered incantations, a mixture of Latin prayers and alchemical formulas, convinced that the right combination would unlock the secret to halting the plague. His fervor bordered on mania. Isabella watched him, her initial fascination giving way to concern. The once meticulous scholar now resembled a man possessed. The air was thick with the stench of strange concoctions, a stark contrast to the sterile environment she expected from a man of the cloth. Elias, plagued by rumors of Thomas's increasingly erratic experiments, felt a growing unease. He knew the power of the ingredients he had provided, and the potential for harm if misused. He feared Thomas was losing sight of the ethical boundaries of his craft. "I've done it, Isabella," Thomas exclaimed, his voice hoarse but filled with excitement. "I've found the elixir. The cure for the pestilence lies within this vial." The liquid glowed with an unnatural light, casting eerie shadows across the room. Isabella hesitated, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. The vial's unnatural glow, coupled with Thomas's manic energy, filled her with doubt. "What is it made of, Thomas? What are the potential consequences?" "Consequences are secondary, Isabella," Thomas retorted, his voice rising in pitch. "People are dying in the streets. We must act and act now. The composition is complicated, but I assure you it is divinely inspired." Jean de Venette, ever the watchful chronicler, documented Thomas's descent into what he perceived as madness. He struggled with the ethical implications of recording such potentially heretical activities, fearing it would further condemn the already suffering city. "Thomas, you must listen to me," Isabella pleaded, her voice echoing in the small laboratory. "This is not science, it's recklessness. You cannot unleash something upon the city without knowing the full extent of its power." Thomas turned away, his grip tightening on the vial. "You don't understand, Isabella. This is bigger than both of us. This is about saving Avignon, saving humanity. I won't let fear paralyze me when so many lives are at stake." Elias, having heard of the glowing elixir, hurried to the monastery, his heart heavy with dread. He knew Thomas was playing with forces he didn't fully comprehend, and he feared the consequences would be catastrophic. Isabella's disappointment deepened. She realized that Thomas had become consumed by his ambition, blinded by the prospect of scientific glory. A chilling premonition washed over her. The man she once admired was now a danger to himself and everyone around him. Thomas hesitated, the weight of Isabella's words and the image of countless dying citizens pressing down on him. Was he truly on the verge of salvation, or had his ambition led him down a path of delusion? The fate of Avignon hung precariously in the balance, dependent on the choice he was about to make. The air in Thomas's laboratory hung thick with the acrid smell of sulfur and burnt herbs. He felt a disturbing vibration that made him question whether his actions were not the means to an end, but the beginning of a new chapter of disaster. Isabella, having gained access to Thomas's lab in his absence, noticed a disturbing trend. The discarded vials seemed to attract flies, and the flies themselves seemed unnatural, sluggish. She picked up a small vial and turned it to the light, her face grim. Jean de Venette watched the grim procession, his quill scratching furiously against the parchment. He knew that history would judge this time harshly, and he felt a growing unease about the alchemist's activities. The dead were piling up faster than ever. "Master Elias," Isabella whispered, her voice trembling, "I fear Brother Thomas's experiments are not what they seem. I saw flies near his leavings, unnaturally sluggish as if diseased." Elias stopped grinding, his piercing blue eyes narrowing. "The flies, you say? Thomas plays a dangerous game, dabbling in secrets best left undisturbed. The line between cure and curse is thinner than a spider's silk." Consumed by his work, Thomas remained oblivious. He was convinced he was on the verge of a breakthrough, a panacea that would silence the bells of death forever. He failed to notice that his small cough had become something more. "Friar Jean," the Inquisitor intoned, his voice cold, "we have heard whispers of Brother Thomas's unorthodox practices. Tell us, what have you witnessed?" Isabella wrestled with her conscience. Could she condemn Thomas, a man driven by noble intentions, even if his actions were unknowingly spreading death? Or did her silence make her complicit in the tragedy unfolding around them? Elias knew he had to act. The Inquisition was a dangerous force, but Thomas's experiments were an even greater threat. He began preparing a draft, a powerful emetic, hoping to at least slow the alchemist's dangerous work. The pestilence had finally caught up with Thomas. He lay helpless, his body burning, his mind racing. Was this divine retribution, or a cruel twist of fate, the alchemist poisoned by his own creations? Jean de Venette continued to chronicle the unfolding tragedy. He wrote of the alchemist's folly, the noblewoman's dilemma, and the apothecary's desperate attempts to stem the tide. He knew that the truth, however painful, must be preserved. Isabella made her decision. She would speak the truth, regardless of the consequences. Avignon deserved to know the truth of the alchemist's folly. Isabella's arrival was unannounced. Her usually composed demeanor was replaced by a steely resolve as she entered Thomas's lab, the air thick with the odors of his experiments. "Thomas," Isabella began, her voice firm, "I've reviewed your notes, the records of your experiments. There are anomalies. The mortality rates near the areas where you've been collecting your ingredients, they're disproportionately high, higher than the rest of the city. Have you considered the possibility that your activities might be contributing?" Thomas stared at her, speechless. The thought had crossed his mind, a fleeting shadow of doubt, but he had dismissed it, burying himself deeper into his work. That's impossible. I'm trying to save them. Meanwhile, in his apothecary, Elias prepared a poultice for a plague-stricken patient. The news of Thomas's increasingly erratic behavior had reached him, stirring up old, buried memories. Jean de Venette diligently continued his chronicle, noting the rise in skepticism and superstition alongside the devastating losses. He sensed a turning point, a growing disillusionment with both the church and the promises of science. Elias, his heart heavy, sought out Thomas. He carried with him an old herbal, a relic from a previous outbreak, decades before, during the reign of Philip VI. There was a physician, Elias began, his voice low and grave, who sought a cure. He experimented much like you. He found something, but it changed the very nature of the disease, made it spread faster, more violently. He showed Thomas the illustration, a depiction of buboes unlike any he had seen before. He thought he was helping, but he unleashed something far worse. This knowledge, it is a dangerous fire, Thomas. Be careful how you wield it. The color drained from Thomas's face. The pieces began to fall into place. The higher mortality rates, the unusual virulence of the disease, the unsettling vibrations he had felt during his experiments. Had he, in his desperate quest to cure the plague, inadvertently made it worse? Isabella watched Thomas, her expression a mixture of pity and fear. She knew the burden he now carried, the terrifying possibility that his actions had unleashed something far more terrible than the plague itself. Thomas stood in the heart of his laboratory, the air thick with the scent of sulfur and regret. The weight of his ambition, the folly of his knowledge, threatened to crush him. He had sought to conquer death, but had he instead become its unwitting servant? The crucible glowed with an unearthly light. Thomas stared into its depths, seeing not the promise of a cure, but the reflection of a city teetering on the brink of oblivion. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that his ambition had blinded him. Isabella watched him, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. She saw the fire in his eyes, not the righteous fire of a healer, but the destructive blaze of a man consumed by his own intellect. Elias, his face a mask of sorrow, offered a sprig of rue. "The city burns, Thomas," he croaked. "Your pursuit, it must end. The cost is too great." With a guttural cry, Thomas seized a hammer and brought it down upon his creation. The glass shattered, the alchemical solution hissing as it met the cold stone floor. The sound echoed the breaking of his own ambition. Jean de Venette, his hand trembling, continued his chronicle. He wrote of the plague, of the terror, and of the choices men made in the face of death. He wondered if future generations would learn from their mistakes. Isabella, abandoning her intellectual pursuits, devoted herself to easing the suffering of the afflicted. She saw in their pain the true cost of unchecked ambition and the desperate need for simple compassion. Elias, his knowledge of herbs now more vital than ever, worked tirelessly to provide comfort to the ravaged city. He had always believed in the power of nature to heal, but now he understood its capacity for destruction as well. Stripped of his ambition, Thomas sought solace in prayer. He realized that true knowledge lay not in mastering the elements, but in understanding the limits of human endeavor and the boundless grace of God. The plague began to wane, leaving behind a city scarred but not broken. Jean de Venette walked the empty streets, recording the slow return of life, the tentative steps towards a new beginning. Avignon slowly emerged from the shadow of death. The bells, once tolling for the dead, now rang out in cautious celebration. The city would never be the same, but life, tenacious as ever, found a way to bloom again. Elias tended his garden, replanting what was lost. He knew that the earth held both the cure and the poison, and that wisdom lay in understanding the delicate balance between them. Thomas, now a humble teacher, shared his knowledge with the children of Avignon. He taught them not of alchemy, but of humility, of compassion, and of the importance of seeking wisdom in all things, never forgetting the devastating cost of blind ambition.